2 years in a row, the Los Angeles Rams have failed a team that did not control their own destiny. They needed a Rams victory, and the Rams did not deliver thanks to 2 consecutive Week 18 losses. 2021 was the year that the Rams went to the Super Bowl, and they ultimately beat the Cincinnati Bengals. But they had a bit of a rough road getting there, losing every single game they played in November. Nonetheless, the Rams were still able to clinch the NFC West thanks to an all-out collapse due to the Cardinals. Cardinals did not beat the Seahawks in Week 18, so thus, despite controlling their own destiny after the Rams lost, they somehow lost to the Seahawks, who were doing terrible that season. Thus, it was the Rams who got the NFC West title instead. Now, the Rams lost Week 18 as well to the 49ers, and that proved to be a problem for the New Orleans Saints. After Week 17, a 49ers win ensured that a 3-way tie between the Saints, 49ers, and Eagles could not happen. Or, well, actually could happen, but they wouldn't all have the same conference record. It ensured that. I think that's what happened. And basically, because of this, the Eagles clinched the playoff spot in Week 17 despite being behind the 49ers. So, in that scenario, the 49ers still controlled their own destiny getting into the playoffs. The Saints had to beat the Falcons, which they did, but the Rams also had to beat the 49ers. If the Rams could not beat the 49ers, if the 49ers could not beat the Rams, then then the Saints would make it to the playoffs above them, because they'd have a 7-5 conference record, 49ers at 6-6, both having 9-8 records. The Eagles, even losing Week 18, won a tiebreaker against the Saints, but they also then lost a tiebreaker with the 49ers, though it didn't matter because the 49ers wound up having one more win than the Eagles anyway. In order for the Eagles to be the 6th seed, they would need their own win, a win from the Saints, and a loss from the 49ers. Or, that's what they would have needed. So, the Rams essentially failed the Saints. The Saints are still very bitter about it, because had the Rams won that game that they really should have won, then it would have been the Saints who got into the playoffs instead of the 49ers. Now, as for 2022, that's another year in which the Lions are also pretty mad at the Rams. The Lions gave them Matthew Stafford and the Rams won a Super Bowl. So now it's supposed to be the Rams are showing the favor, although at 5-11, the odds were stacked up against them. And the Seattle Seahawks won 19-16 in overtime after a fourth quarter comeback. Yikes. Not good for LA. And this wound up kicking Detroit out. With the Seahawks at 9-8, the best Detroit could do was finish 9-8, and the Seattle Seahawks had the tiebreaker. They had the tiebreaker, so it kicked Detroit out. Now, Detroit would have also needed to have beaten the Green Bay Packers, but they did. They beat the Packers 20-16, but they could not make the playoffs anyway because Seattle beat the Rams. Again, another example of where the Rams failed a team. Now, teams can always be held accountable for another team's failure. Now, if they control their own destiny and didn't get it, they have no one to blame but themselves. But sometimes these teams that don't control their own destiny land into trouble. In 2022, for example, the Patriots, you can't feel sympathy for them because number one, they're the Patriots, and number two, they had the control of their own destiny. Did they go up against a really tough opponent, the Buffalo Bills? Yes. And the Bills would not rest their starters because they still wanted a neutral site game, even though they were locked in at the number 2 seed. Also, they're doing this for Damar Hamlin. And they obviously would not rest their starters for this important game, and no one was rooting for the Patriots, even though it meant an elimination meant no playoff berth for them. Now, the Miami Dolphins beat the New York Jets, although the game was tied 6-6 late in the fourth quarter, but Miami got 5 extra points thanks to a field goal and then a Jets safety. Now, because of that, the Miami Dolphins clinched the final playoff spot based on their tiebreak against the Pittsburgh Steelers. If the Jets were actually able to win that game, then the Steelers would have made it in because they won their own game against the Browns. But again, not controlling your own destiny, it becomes really rough. And, we just talked about what happened in the NFC. 2021, the AFC was really ugly. The Colts had control of their own destiny, and they somehow could not beat the 2-14 Jacksonville Jaguars, who managed to kick the Colts out of the playoffs. Now, this benefited the Steelers, who not only needed to win their own game, but they also needed to have the Colts lose. And I think the most interesting part is that they need the Raiders and Chargers to not tie, which almost happened, but Brandon Staley calls a timeout, and the Raiders attempted a field goal to sacrifice the Chargers and to allow the Pittsburgh Steelers into the playoffs. So we saw the Pittsburgh Steelers make it into the playoffs. Pittsburgh Steelers made it to the playoffs. The Raiders also made it to the playoffs. Kicked the Chargers out, who I don't know how it would have worked if the Colts had won. If the Colts had won, I think that would have meant that the Patriots would have been clinched, or would have clinched a spot, and the Colts would have. So then it becomes ugly. And then we have the Baltimore Ravens, who lost, but even if they won, would have been eliminated from the playoffs because of a Dolphins win. Although the Dolphins were already eliminated, it just gets uglier and uglier and uglier for the 2021 AFC playoffs, mainly because 10 teams finished with winning records. 10 teams finished with winning records. That's a lot. And when you have the Chargers, where if they tied, would have been above the Raiders, and because of the Raiders win, they were able to get 5 spots ahead of the Chargers. Yeah, that's how you know things were really ugly, even into Week 18 in the AFC in 2021. There are other times. I know that my dad was very upset in 2020 because the Giants lost control of their own destiny in a 3-game losing streak. In a very weak division as well. And even though the Giants could beat the Cowboys, the Eagles did not beat the Washington football team, as they were called back then, thus allowing the Washington football team to clinch the NFC East. In a very weak division, there's really nothing the Giants could have been proud of. Honestly, the football team had a terrible year, even with making the playoffs with a record of 7-9. But again, this just shows how important, controlling your own destiny is. So, yeah. Yeah, the long story short is that if you need to have another team do something for you to be in, you're no longer controlling your own destiny because you alone can't get yourself the desired result.